Hello everyone, so before we continue into the TrailsofAzure review, I need to give a disclaimer. I was graciously provided with a review copy from NIS for TrailsofAzure on PC prior to release, which is not the copy I'm holding. I bought this one physically, but I did get a free PC copy, which is actually the first time I think that has ever actually happened for the sake of a review. So I want to thank NIS so much for allowing me to get the video out to you all at least somewhat sooner than I would have before. Still, I do need to mention that this is going to be my honest thoughts, with parts of it written long before I ever actually received the code, and if there is anything that I think seriously hurts the experience, I will mention it just like I would the positives. So, without further ado, let's continue. That said, before we go into TrailsofAzure, I want to take a bit of a detour to talk about the Evolution ports. I mentioned the Evolution re-releases before, so I may as well go ahead and explain what those are. Shortly after the ColdSteel games started to be released on the Vita, Falcom reached out to Kadokawa Games to create remasters of every single game from Sky FC through Azure for the platform. Remasters that have not been released in the West. So in order to give my impressions of these, I went out of my way to set up a Japanese PSN account on my PS TV to download some demos for these. I love you guys, you're all great, please support me on KoFi. Now what separates these versions from the other releases is that they not only gave them a visual overhaul, but also made many changes to standardize the games. So let's break down what's different. The Sky games got new portraits and artwork to make it more consistent with the Crossbell games, with said portraits actually animating, which is pretty neat. All 5 games, including Crossbell to a lesser extent, received full Japanese voice acting for almost everything aside from NPCs, which is very impressive. The music was also rearranged as well, being done both internally by Falcom and people outside of the company. That said, the music is probably the most divisive part of these releases, especially in the Sky games. Some of the music chose to kick the grandiose up to 1000, and while that works for some songs, it doesn't for others. If you have seen my Mana reviews, it's very much a Secret of Mana remake situation here. For example, here's the original battle theme from 2nd chapter. And here's the Evo version. Then there's the fishing theme from 3rd. And here's the Evo version. Anyway, this is just a small sample to give an idea of how different these songs can get in the Sky Evos. Other changes to the Sky games include nearly everything from the Crossbell games. That's right, field attacks, turn bonuses, the menus, easy character swapping on the field, Crossbell's battle UI, and even things from the ColdSteel games such as Zero Arts are all here in Sky. Though to my surprise, they did not add the evade counter mechanic to the Sky games, so that's one area where they were surprisingly faithful. These versions also introduced 2 brand new bonuses, Bad Attacks and Zero Crafts. Bad Attacks give a guaranteed random status ailment to whoever gets hit on that turn with a physical attack, while Zero Crafts set the CP consumption to 0 for that turn, meaning that you can throw out any crafts, including S-Crafts, for no cost, which is very funny. As for Zero and Azure's re-releases, they are a bit less ambitious. Aside from the aforementioned voice acting, the gameplay is unchanged as far as I know, and the portraits are the same as before, only animated now. They also redid the soundtracks for these two, and while I do miss the Star Force synth in some tracks, this is a bit of a hot take, but these are largely solid remixes of the original soundtrack, with the exception of a few songs across both games. In fact, I might say that Azure's Evolution soundtrack in particular does a really good job of remixing the original soundtrack, and I actually prefer a few of the Evo songs for that one, so again, good stuff. The Evolution versions of these games also added some cool mini-games where you can actually interact with Randy's dartboard, for example, and they also introduced brand new quests that were not in the original. The worst thing about playing these versions is that there's no turbo feature, meaning exploration is significantly more of a slog in these versions. Though there is a battle animation speed up button in the Sky games, it has a bit of a startup, which I'm not a fan of. Surprisingly, there's actually no way to speed up fights at all in the Crossbell evolutions, so in my opinion this kind of makes the Evo versions of these one of the worst ways you can experience the games, as speed up options are kind of a necessity for this series if you ask me. Now, something unique to these evolution ports are brand new opening animations. While some openings are fine, some of these evolution openings are some of the worst openings I have ever seen. They are very prone to spoilers, with second chapter and Azure's openings being the worst about it by far. I do not recommend watching these till you finish the games at all. You will be spoiled. Don't watch them. Overall, I can't really recommend these ports since they are stuck on a dead platform and don't have an English translation. While some of the additions to the Sky games are nice, I feel the cons of searching them out far outweigh the pros. But if you want some of these features for the Sky games, if you don't mind some modding, you are not totally out of luck here. This is because you can actually mod several aspects of the evolution releases onto the Steam ports. Confession, I actually used the Evo voice mod for second chapter and third, which actually helps spice up my replays. The reason I didn't talk about this there is that most people likely won't be experiencing the games that way. Modding can be kind of difficult for some people, and I wanted to keep the first video simple for newcomers. Plus, I didn't use this mod at all in my original playthroughs, and I enjoyed them just fine without the voice acting. But if you could figure it out, I definitely recommend the voice acting mod because it does actually enhance several scenes, though there are definitely moments where you can clearly tell they took liberties with the script. Now, for some less popular mods, there are the evolution portraits, cutscene CGs, and the soundtrack. These will definitely make the games feel a little bit more like the evolution versions, though worth noting that the evolution portraits are not animated. Personally speaking, I don't really like the evolution art style that much, at least on Estelle, but it's something you could do if that appeals to you. Now, there are actually some mods for the Crossbell games as well, such as one that actually restores the evolution quests to the games, and I actually find that one really impressive in particular and definitely worth checking out. There's also a really cool set of mods by Shin Kiseki that adds portraits to several NPCs in Zero and Azure, so I definitely recommend that as well. It's not really an Evo mod, but I definitely think it will enhance your playthrough. Anyway, that is pretty much everything from the evolution ports. I wanted to explain it right here because it is actually a lot easier to explain once I've established everything that Zero has added to the formula. So again, hope you guys understand. Anyway, that is enough of that detour. Let's move on. TrailsToAzure is my favorite RPG of all time. For the longest time, that honor went to Golden Sun: The Lost Age, and I said as much in my review of that game. However, now that I've replayed Azure, it is so incredibly good. But what kept it from being my favorite before? Don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved it, but at the time, second chapter left such a strong impact on me that it made it hard for Azure to compete with it. It was only after playing some of the later games that Azure continued to grow bigger and bigger in the back of my mind, leading us to today. So let's begin. Just like last time, I am primarily looking at the Steam PC release of the game, thanks NIS, though I did purchase a Switch copy and can confirm that everything that is on PC is also on Switch. Though it seems that once again, the PS4 version is just a straight translation of the Kai release, so keep that in mind if you plan on buying that version. I also want to make it clear that TrailsToAzure, much like Sky's second chapter before it, is a direct sequel. Now, luckily the ending of Zero is a lot more merciful, which means I can talk about this a lot easier without spoiling things, but the game itself does spoil the events in Zero, so keep that in mind. But if you absolutely want to go into Azure with no spoilers whatsoever, just know this is one of the most impactful RPGs I have ever played, and they added a lot of gameplay that makes this easily one of my favorites in the entire series. If you have not played it, please do so now, and I'll see you when you come back. Now, before we continue, I really want to take a moment to commend NIS and Geofront for their translation job this time. I mentioned before how Zero released with a whole bunch of translation issues in regards to typos and untranslated text. Well, I can confirm that aside from one hiccup that is still present on PS4, I didn't really notice any major typos this time. So all I gotta say is good job, guys. With all that said, I am really excited to talk about this one, so let's go ahead and seize the truth and talk about the second game in the Crossbell duology, TrailsToAzure. As previously mentioned, TrailsToAzure is a direct sequel to TrailsFromZero and is once again set in the same region of Crossbell. Similar to Sky's second chapter, you can transfer your save data from Zero, allowing you to bring over Lloyd's level, room collectibles, and upgraded combo crafts. Additionally, NPCs that you interacted with in the last game remember you, with some giving minor rewards for completing quests in Zero. This game also gives additional bonding points as rewards for reaching maximum bonding points from the last game, which actually goes a good way towards trying to complete the bonding achievements, but I'll go into that later. I would make the argument that transferring your data in this game actually gets you more rewards than the Sky games did, and I find that really impressive because SC already did more than most games would do with this sort of system, and I love this sort of thing. But now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about the story. TrailsstoAzure is set 3 months after the end of TrailsFromZero. The special support section is temporarily disbanded while the group prepares for turbulent times in Crossbell. Now, while this event was not shown on screen, there was a drama CD that was released along with the Japanese collector's edition of Azure that does show this event in a little bit more detail. While it did have some really nice scenes, my favorite being a scene with Randy that dealt with the fallout of the last game, you do not need to experience this at all to understand the bigger picture here, which is more than I could say for later drama CDs. At the start of this game, the special support section is reinstated with Lloyd and Ellie returning, as well as 2 new members, Noel Seeker and Wazi Hemisphere, characters who were guest party members in the last game but join as full party members in this title. And the SSS will need the added support because much like second chapter, the stakes have raised significantly in this game. I mentioned in the Sky review how there was an element of geopolitics involved in later Trails games, and this is the game where that really becomes a heavy focus. After the events in the last game, tensions between Crossbell and its neighbors have been on the rise. Between Erebonia to the west, Calvard to the east, a Jaeger Corps moving into the city, and an all too familiar snake-like organization lurking in the shadows, things have definitely begun to escalate in Crossbell. Though not every force approaching Crossbell is malicious, as some familiar faces also arrive in the country. Now, like the last game, characters from the Sky trilogy do make an appearance in this game, and I do not want to spoil who exactly, but it is incredibly well thought out, and I absolutely love the additions. One of which actually caught me by surprise, and is probably the best kept secret of the entire game, and I'm a big fan of it. Along with the Sky characters, there are even some ColdSteel characters in this. Now, some of these are additions that were made after the fact in the PS4 version and are fairly minor all things considered, but it's really cool to see. I could see someone saying this potentially damages the original's artistic integrity, but I feel they all fit in rather naturally and it made sense to include them. Also, as someone that played the Geofront version before this, I actually really like seeing these characters react to the events in this game, and it made everything feel a lot more connected. Now, just like Second Chapter developed its own secondary characters, this game also chose to develop its own secondary cast. At the start of this game, as mentioned before, the group has been split up. This is so you are forced to really get to know Noel and Wazi better, both in regards to their character and the gameplay, which is pretty clever. Though of course Randy and Tio do rejoin the group, with Randy in particular getting some really great moments in this narrative. Ellie and Tio do not get a whole lot of development in this game though, and I've seen that get some heat. Personally, I think some people tend to ignore that they had their development in Zero, and characters like Zin had nothing to do in first chapter either, so it's really not a problem for me. Additionally, I think this allows the new members of the special support section to get a little bit more focus in this title. For example, a character that really grew on me on this replay was Wazi. On my first playthrough, Wazi wasn't one of my favorites. A lot of the time he felt like a really watered down Olivier in terms of personality, only a bit less bombastic. But after this replay, I realized there was a good amount of depth to him. He's a very interesting character who bounces off the rest of the cast really well, especially Lloyd and Randy. Also, despite me already liking her, Noel really grew on me while replaying this game. Now, I mentioned before that she was a bit of a car nut, but my favorite trait of hers is that she could be kind of oblivious too, with a really funny moment where Randy and Wazi spat out some innuendos, with Noel taking a second to process what they said. It was very funny and cute. Personally, while Risha may still have my best girl pick, I actually ship Lloyd and Noel the most. They have a really cute dynamic and I really love it. Though if I have any complaint, Noel's backstory gets elaborated in a lot of missable NPC dialogue, which is not the best, but I'd argue her arc still works even if you miss them. Outside of the special support section, we also get development for characters such as Wald, Risha, and other characters like Soli, who was a side quest character in the last game. Lloyd doesn't really get much development in this game, which does get some heat from some detractors I've met, but here's the thing, I love him in this game so much. Things in this game get really rough, and Lloyd's determination is constantly tested, but he does his best in the face of it, and it's genuinely inspiring. Don't bully my boy. Anyways, there are a few characters last time I chose not to mention, but I'll go ahead right now. I'm actually about to drop some major spoilers for TrailsFromZero right here, so go ahead and skip, and I'll see you guys when I talk about the villains. I actually called this twist, and this is the exact moment I fell in love with Risha. Risha was revealed in the last game to be the assassin Yin from Calvard, and this creates an interesting dynamic anytime she appears in this game. Now Risha is kind of well known in the fanbase, mostly for kind of degenerate reasons, but putting that aspect of her aside, this game shows that she has an internal conflict. On the one hand is tradition, and the other is her love for her new family with Ark and CL. Risha spends both of these games living her double life, and the plot of this game actually tests that aspect of her a lot, and it's really compelling. Now, is it original? Probably not, but I think there's a lot more to her than people give her credit for. Next is Zeit. Zeit is a sentient wolf who cannot talk directly but joins the special support section as their unofficial police dog, and I love him. And the other character is Kia. Kia is a little girl with no memories of her past who was adopted by the special support section about halfway through Zero, and quickly worked her way right into the heart of the group. Kia is one of the most adorable characters I've ever met in a JRPG, with one optional scene in this game being the fattest dose of diabetes I have ever seen. However, she has a lot of mystery surrounding her too, including her name. I mean, look at that, why is it spelled that way? Well, we actually never get an answer for that one, surprisingly, but Kia does get her own arc in this game, and I won't say too much about it, but I'm a big fan of it. But that said, let's take a hard pivot back to the plot by moving on to the villains. So in second chapter, they introduced the Society of Ouroboros, adding a driving force disguised plotline. But Azure isn't content to just bring back the old villains, but also a new group. The Jaeger Corps mentioned previously, the Red Constellation led by Sigmund and his daughter Shirley. It's one thing to have an organization that you already know is up to no good, but if you add political powers and a terrifying second group of villains to the mix, well, you get a strong sense that something bad is going to happen, but not how, which definitely adds to the suspense. Now, I'll go ahead and say that Shirley is probably the most controversial character in this game, and I don't want to totally touch on that because it's a bit like kicking a bee's nest. I'll just say that in the context of this game, she is absolutely terrifying, and I think that's the main takeaway they wanted. Despite that, I don't actually have much to say about her dad Sigmund. I mean, he is definitely intimidating and works really well as an antagonist, but as a character, he is slightly less interesting than Shirley in my opinion, but that's how I feel anyway. Now for Ouroboros, we have the returning Campanella, as well as the new character, Arianrhod. Now for Arianrhod, I mostly find her cool more than anything. Her design and premise remind me a lot of characters from the Fate franchise, and if you have watched anything from Fate, you probably know what I mean. This is also the game that officially set in stone the precedent that when these games hype up a character, it's a warning. I won't say too much more than that, other than the fact that I had fun with it. The story of this game has the highest stakes of any Trails game up to this point and manages to get pretty intense at points in ways that at the very least Sky FC and SC did not reach. It has all kinds of twists, turns, impactful moments, and characters that just left a really strong impression both on me and the games after this. In fact, I might make the argument that this might be the most important Trails game in the entire series, and it kind of blows my mind that they waited this long to localize this game. The effects of this game's plot ripple into so many games after this, and it's kind of insane. Now, the biggest complaint I probably have with this story is that the final chapter is incredibly long. I'd argue it is an entire fourth of the game, possibly more, so it's probably a good idea to take breaks during that chapter because it took me around 5 different play sessions to beat that chapter, but I was engaged the whole way through and I cannot recommend it enough. If you wanted a Trails game that definitely had a lot more exciting story beats on the regular, this is the game for you. Anyway, that was quite a lot I had to say about the story, so let's talk about the gameplay. Now, just like the last game and second chapter before it, exploration and quests are pretty much the same as always. A difference, however, is that you have full access to the region more or less from the get-go this time. On top of that, you get a company card that allows you to fast travel anywhere you want without the need for a bus, and I love this thing. You can also still use the buses if you want to, though I mainly use them to quickly return to your car as the car does not travel to where you are. Now, I'm sure this could be made more convenient, but it hardly was ever an issue for me personally. You can also customize your car in this game, which is kind of rad. You can buy all kinds of cosmetics for it, including a paint job that shows you have no shame. While most of the upgrades for your car are cosmetic, there are upgrades that allow it to refill your HP, MP, and even craft points. Once you get the last one in particular, you never have to use an inn ever again, and it's kind of insane. This actually made farming Sepith from Shining Palms very easy to do since you could go back and forth between the same 4 screens and refill your craft points. If these things weren't infinite, I'm pretty sure this would 100% count as poaching at this point. May the palms fear the Teomobile.
Well, we mustn't keep our public waiting, huh? It's showtime, Phil.
As for the cooking, it works more or less the same as the last game, only you have more characters to work with this time. That said, there's one change that I actually like a lot. Unlike last game, you can now learn recipes by finding cookbooks and posters out on the field, with most of them available basically the whole game. Though I definitely recommend you do grab them ASAP because there are a few that do disappear. I vastly prefer this to Zero's system since this is a lot more fair and generous, and what kills me is that every game after this uses Zero's system. Man. However, I do want to give a special shout out to the side quests in this game because this game has probably my favorite side quests in the entire series. There's a fun train chase with an old lady that always gets a laugh out of me, a subplot involving some buttheads from the Republic who get away with crimes due to being foreigners, and quests involving some beloved characters from Sky who make a return. There's also a questline in this game that pays off a backstory from the Sky games, and I love that. Monster hunting quests were fine in the older games, but in this game you unlock a combo craft every single time you complete one. Now how these monsters got these scrolls, I have no idea, but getting something so powerful from beating a monster fight feels incredibly rewarding, and I'm a big fan of it. There are also hidden quests involving a blind traveling reporter named Marcel Nielsen. I actually really advise that you do all of these quests specifically because it does affect the narrative, and I will leave it at that. But it is also very easy to miss these quests, so once again use a spoiler-free guide if you can. Now something this game expands on is the game-long fishing subplot, and this is probably the best incarnation of it. While Zero technically started it, this is the first game to attach some story to it. The Fisherman's Guild, after taking a hiatus, finds itself suddenly taken over by the Imperial Fishing Club, and you have to help them take it back by outfishing the Imperials. To do so, you have to catch every fish you can and challenge the Elite Four of the Fisherman's Club. It is such an absurd idea for a long-term quest, but not gonna lie, eventually completing it and getting their guild back for them felt really nice to do. But I could see a lot of people pass on it even though the reward for it is pretty worth it. Outside of the fishing quest though, they actually introduced a game-long minigame you can play against other characters. If you are a big fan of Puyo Puyo, allow me to introduce Palm Party. In this minigame you have to match up colored palms in order to delete rows. If you manage to chain multiple deletes, you will fill up a craft point meter. You can then use this meter either to erase the bottom rows defensively or to fill up the enemy's rows offensively. This is actually my favorite minigame in the entire Trails series up to this point, and it's really fun. I especially like how you get to choose how to use your combo points, and it adds a little bit of strategy. Now usually when developers make knockoff minigames, they tend to not be as fun as the original, but I think this is a pretty fun time sink. I definitely spent a lot more time playing Palm Party than was necessary on this replay. But that said, I definitely recommend that you do both of these quest lines because they actually reward you with the best gear in the game. What is that gear? Well, let's get into that juicy combat. Now I gushed like crazy in the last game about the combat, but this is the game where the Trails combat really peaks for me. Let's go into why. Much like how Sky's second chapter improved on the gameplay of first chapter, this is the game that takes the combat from zero and brings a few major additions. Additions that may surprise you if you are a fan of the ColdSteel games. Well, let's start with how they rebalance the cast. Now last time I praised Zero and how it played, but if you are wanting a challenging experience, it was probably one of the easier games in the series. Now this is due to many reasons, but the main one is that they made the crafts way too good in that game. So the first thing Azure does is nerf the crafts. Randy's Smoke Bomb dropped from 100% blind to 30% blind, Tio's Guaranteed Freeze got a similar debuff, and Lloyd's Burning Heart doesn't buff him nearly as much. Now by the late game, these crafts will power up again, with Lloyd's Burning Heart becoming even more OP than it was in Zero if you can believe it, but since you don't get that kind of power early on, it's safe to say that this game has a much better difficulty curve, with the late game being pretty challenging on hard despite the restored crafts. Not as difficult as third in my opinion, but definitely up there. But moving on from the main four, as mentioned before, we have some new permanent members of the special support section, so let's talk about them. Null Seeker has an area of effect range like Tio and Tita before her, allowing her to hit multiple enemies. But she also comes with crafts that can inflict AT delay and lower enemies' movements, making her great for support. Similar to Randy's Smoke Bomb, Null has a Sleep Grenade craft. This allows her to attack multiple enemies with a 60% chance to put them to sleep. Now unlike Blind, Sleep goes away when an enemy is hit, meaning this is mostly useful in a pinch if you need time to buff or regroup. Now towards the end of the game, this move stops being as useful when most encounters start to just resist every kind of status ailment. Though her AoE is still good for widespread damage, she definitely isn't as good as she is early on. Wazi is interesting. He is a brawler with a single target S-craft, which kind of makes him not the best for physical attacks. However, he has an AoE impede craft, which I found very useful in some quests and chest encounters. He also has a natural affinity towards magic, much like Olivia in the Sky games, which made him one of my favorite mages. Now the combo crafts got the biggest improvement over the last game. In the last game, Randy, Tio, and Ellie could only get combo crafts with each other at the very end of the game. However, as previously mentioned, your external party members start getting combos with each other as early as Chapter 1, and additionally, due to a retooling of the final bonding event system, you are free to use them as much as you want, and they are amazing. I often found myself using combo crafts more than S-crafts due to their damage output and range. They are so insanely good. Additionally, all those upgraded combo crafts from the end of Zero transfer over to this game, and it made all of those New Game Plus playthroughs I did feel very, very worth it. That said, I think I've talked enough about the refinements, so let's go ahead and talk about some new stuff, starting with a mechanic called Burst. Burst shows up during key moments in Azure and isn't a consistent mechanic, but when it's present you have a meter in the corner of the screen that gradually fills as you attack things. When it's full you can activate it and your entire party gets damage multipliers, immediate turns, and instant casting for the duration of the meter. You can also consume items to fill up the meter, which can be pretty busted when used at the right time. I personally found myself using spells the most while doing Burst, since you can instant cast anything, and due to the damage multipliers, let's just say that you can melt some fights if you use their weaknesses. On top of the magic though, let's talk about this game's biggest gameplay addition, the Master Quartz. Master Quartz are a bit different from regular quartz in the fact that they can level up like materia from Final Fantasy VII and have a designated spot in your orbment. They also carry various stat increases which can substantially affect the stats of who you equip them to. Additionally, they all have unique gimmicks too, and they are very fun to mess around with. Scepter, for example, has a passive where attacking things makes the enemies drop Sepith, with the drop rate increasing with every level up the quartz gets. Aegis allows the user to start off a battle with max guard, allowing them to tank hits, and Mobius allows you to mob all over your allies, increasing the strength and range of items. Also, when Mobius is fully leveled up, it gives an AoE property to items, which means yes, you can use one Zerum capsule on your whole party and they all get full craft points. It is insane. In my opinion, the best Master Quartz in the game are Chevalier and Magius. These are obtained from the Fishing Quest and Palm minigames respectively, and they increase damage dealt by up to 2 times as HP drops. Chevalier in particular, when used in conjunction with Randy's Warcry craft, allows Randy to do some massive damage with his S-crafts, and I absolutely love it. It's so broken. The main downside of Master Quartz is that it can take a while to max out their levels, but if you do manage to level up one all the way, you gain access to a Master Art. These are very powerful with varying effects, but may leave a party member unable to act for a substantial period of time. That said, if they are used in the right situation, they are totally worth it. My favorite of these increases your craft point gain and massively boosts the attack power of your active party, allowing the damage you do to shoot up immensely. I managed to take out a substantial chunk of the final boss's HP on hard with one of Randy's S-crafts by doing a combo of attack buffs, Burst, the Chevalier gimmick, and a Master Art multiplier with a 200 CP meter. Yes, you can do that if you want to. It is very funny. These Master Quartz honestly can kind of break the game in two if you know what you are doing, and I think this is the main reason the endgame, especially the final boss, really clap you on hard if you don't play carefully, and I'm a big fan of it. Personally, I love the Trails games that are balanced this way. You really feel a tangible sense of reward for mastering the combat, and when it really clicks, it feels like you are outsmarting the game, and in a way I don't really see most turn-based RPGs do, and it's an incredible feeling. Now, in regards to the ornament system, it is pretty much the same as it's always been, though in this case the Master Quartz do have their own Sepith values, so keep that in mind if you're going for a specific build, because the Master Quartz will contribute towards that. Though worth mentioning, this is the last game with the traditional ornament system, meaning that they do completely retool it after this. But after 5 games of having the system, I definitely think it left on a high note. Alright, I've put off talking about this part long enough. It's time to talk about probably one of the most in-depth aspects of TrailsToAzure, the bonding system. Get comfy, guys, we're gonna be here for a bit. Hi, Dad! This game returns the bonding point system from the last game, only instead of 3 potential characters to build points with, this game has 12. Yes, 12. Did I stutter? Like the last game, there are final bonding events with each of your playable party members, with each party member getting upgraded combo crafts. Meanwhile, the remaining characters will have a small scene, and those characters will give you accessories for building bonding points with them, with some accessories being better than others. Now this sounds bad, and in some ways, it is, but there are a few key ways this game actually makes this a bit better, and that was building a solid chunk of the game around this system. See, unlike Zero, this game is a lot more involved with a lot of opportunities to build points. Because of how involved this can get, I definitely recommend using a guide if you want to optimize your first playthrough, but what really helps is the intermission chapter. The intermission chapter is an entire chapter dedicated to farming bonding points. This chapter has 2 halves, a literal anime beach episode which, yep, it's definitely a beach episode, and the other half is Michelin Wonderland, a theme park with 4 attractions: the horror coaster, a fortune teller, a wish-granting mirror, and a Ferris wheel. This section actually has an impressive amount of changing dialogue depending on the attraction. The fortune teller, for example, will always ask you 2 questions, meaning that you have 24 possible interactions with her alone, which is an insane amount of dialogue. And some of them are pretty funny too, such as Tia who asked what her compatibility with Mishi is, which led to some funny foreshadowing for a later quest. On my first playthrough, I actually spent around 1/4 of my possible points here on the NPC characters such as Fran, Ilya, and Kia, so I could get their accessories and otherwise follow the guide for the rest of the game. By the end of the game, I had gotten every single final bonding event and accessory except for Tio and Ellie. If I'd optimized things a little bit better, it's very likely I could have gotten everyone, which is genuinely impressive. I think the biggest lifesaver is that you can now see how far along your bonding points are on the record screen in the PC and Switch versions, which helps a lot in gauging who to spend points with. It's actually kind of fun in a way, routing how I want to spend points during the intermission, and it definitely adds a lot to the game. Now there is one aspect I should mention about the final bonding events in this game, is that there are 3 characters whose entire backstories are either given more clarity in these bonding events, or they are outright not explored in the main story at all. Now, it's something you could easily view on YouTube in the worst case, but it is commonly complained about. The way I see it though, Falcom really wanted both of these games to be replayable to hold fans over while they waited for the next game. To speak personally, I don't mind these final bonding events existing as it does give extra content on repeat playthroughs, but I definitely see the problems people have with it. But this is going to have to be an issue we will have to revisit as we go into the next arc. But on that note, let's address what was my biggest fear coming into this game: the upgraded combo crafts and the completion process. If you recall, I had to replay 0 5 times for every single achievement and every upgraded combo craft. So knowing there were going to be 7 party members in this game, I began to be kind of worried I would have to replay this game 7 times. The good news is, in some ways, they made this a lot easier this time. Other ways not. Let's start with the part that really surprised me. Now once you have seen a final bonding event and save, it is then locked into your game data. When you load a New Game Plus file, those combo crafts are automatically loaded, meaning that you can get every upgraded combo craft in a single playthrough, thank God. That said, this doesn't mean you can do everything on your first time through, as there are still the ultimate weapons. Now luckily, unlike Zero, you can get 2 ultimate weapons and can always get at least 1 per playthrough. One for collecting every copy of this game's book Sunshine Agnes, as well as ore shards located on fields of battle during the final chapter. But that still leaves the other 6 characters, and if there are only 2 ultimate weapons per run, that means 4 playthroughs, right? Well, on New Game Plus, the game actually unlocks some new stuff. First are a few hidden scenes I won't share for spoiler reasons, as well as 6 optional super bosses, with 5 of them dropping Zemurian ore shards. This means that on all repeated playthroughs you are guaranteed an additional ultimate weapon, cutting the maximum playthroughs down to 3. Overall, this is an improvement, but it does have a couple problems. Azure is long, like a lot longer than Zero, and has a lot of missable stuff. For example, there's a Master Quartz where you have to feed your cat KoFi every single in-game day, and I missed a day in both of my playthroughs, which felt incredibly demoralizing considering I thought I was pretty thorough, but I did manage to get it the 3rd time around, so there's that. It also might be because I played this during one of the more difficult college terms I've ever had, oh my god, but it felt like it was a lot harder to memorize the timing for missable events this time compared to Zero, so I had to redo Chapter 2 a lot more times than I would like to admit. Also, I bought a bootleg hard drive that kind of corrupted a whole bunch of my recording files, which meant that I had to re-record a good chunk of Chapter 2. I have fun making these videos sometimes. Add on to this, they decided to make the horror coaster one of the achievement records. Alright, I won't mince words on this one. This is the most miserable thing I've done in a Trails game since the fishing door in 3rd, and I nearly gave up on it just to get this video out there. In premise, this minigame is simple. You ride a cart, QTEs show up, you press the button. The longer you go without missing, the higher the chain, and therefore the higher the points you obtain. To get the record, you need 4,000 points, and in order to do so, you need a massive chain. How do you do that? Never miss. The problem? It felt basically impossible. There were several moments where the QT was clearly on screen and I pressed the button, only for it to miss. I read online that changing the frame rate would help, so I did. Changing the frame rate to 30 did help a little, but no matter how much I played, I kept missing the buttons, and after sinking 4 hours into this, I opened up my Geofront copy and tried it there, and to my surprise, I completed the challenge in a couple tries at 60 FPS. What happened? Well, turns out the problem was actually because I remapped my controls. So to keep things simple, this minigame has 4 buttons: Confirm, Cancel, Camp, and S-Craft. I managed to change around the field buttons because I actually prefer the camp menu on triangle, but this essentially meant that I had 2 buttons assigned to triangle, so anytime triangle showed up I was basically pressing camp and S-craft at the same time, which was leading to it messing up. Now I realize this might be a little bit involved, but if I could talk to NIS for a moment about this, I would probably suggest that they make a separate button mapping scheme for the minigames specifically, but I don't know how involved that would be, and I wouldn't blame them if they did that. But for now, just remember to use default controls when doing this minigame, or suffer my curse. Despite that, I think this game has not been as bad to complete as I thought it would be going into it, but it's definitely not perfect. Just like Zero, it requires more than 1 playthrough, and while this requires 1 less playthrough for everything than it did for Zero, it definitely feels like the first playthrough has more than enough content for most people. I did really enjoy having optional super bosses on New Game Plus though, and to my surprise, the final boss was just as brutal on Nightmare, despite me being a solid 15 levels higher than I was the first time, and as someone that loves a challenge, I really like that. Just like the last game, completing achievements gets you points to spend on New Game Plus features, free access to every minigame including Pain, an art gallery, cutscenes, and an S-Craft gallery where you can view every single S-Craft without the HUD, which was really nice for this video. So overall, despite how much work it was, I had a pretty good time completing this game by the end, and I think it balances out to being about as hard to complete as Zero, which is something I really did not expect. But anyway, before we wrap this all up, we have one last topic to talk about. You know what it is already, it's the soundtrack. Continuing the trend of this game doing what Sky's second chapter did but for Zero, a large chunk of Zero's soundtrack returns from that game. However, the soundtrack is nearly doubled in Azure and matches the shift in tone really well. In fact, a few songs from Sky also make an appearance in this game to accompany the returning characters, with a really fun retro remix of a song from the Sky trilogy here. I won't spoil which song it is, but it caught me off guard and it's a lot of fun. As for the new songs though, like with the game before this, I also love basically the whole soundtrack. It's really good with a notable shift in tone compared to the game that came before, fitting the more serious nature of this story. There's even a song in here that basically took those Mega Man Star Force vibes I felt in the last game and cranked it up to 11, and I was in love with this track. I'm about to do something unconventional at the end of this section, so let's go ahead and get this out of the way. I really wanted to share some of my favorite battle themes in this game because they really took it to the next level in this title. Enjoy. Like with Zero, there is so much to enjoy here and way too little time, so I'll go ahead and put the following titles on screen. I love all of these songs, and Falcom's composers continue to bring the peak content here. While Zero perfected the atmosphere of Crossbell, Azure's music is also a masterclass in every sense of the word. I love basically every single song in this game, and that is never more true than the next song I'm about to talk about. I've been teasing this song all throughout this entire retrospective series so far, so I'm just going to go ahead and indulge myself. That's right, I'm about to talk about the final boss theme of this game. This is obviously going to be a massive song spoiler and is best experienced in-game, so if you do not want to be spoiled, go ahead and skip to the conclusion. This is your final warning. But without further ado, I present my favorite song of all time. This is the Azure Arbitrator. This song is metal as heck. I love the choir at the start that slowly transitions into that power metal goodness you hear throughout the rest of the song, with parts of the melody almost sounding like a conversation between the heroes and the final boss, but maybe I'm reading a bit too much into it, but I just love it. The way the song goes between highs and lows with energetic rock the entire way through is just incredible, and it can only be done by my man Takahiro Unasuga. This is the song that really made me fall in love with Unasuga's tracks, though it's worth mentioning that the final version was arranged by Yukihiro Jundo, who seems to be the classically trained musician of Falcom. Jundo also created a different boss theme in this game that actually has parts of Azure Arbitrator's melody in this, which is just some top level composition. I really love it. Also possibly sacrilegious, but I actually really like the Evolution version of this song. It uses real instruments, but does trade out a slow part for a guitar solo that I personally love to death, but I could see why some people prefer the balance of the original. I have listened to this song pretty much every single week for 2 years now, yet despite that, when I got to the final boss again, I still managed to just rock out to the melody. It's so fast-paced in all of the right ways, and I was very disappointed we didn't get another song like this in the ColdSteel games. An excellent theme in every sense of the word, and I don't think anything will ever top it. TrailsToAzure, for me at least, has the perfect balance of everything. The plot is incredibly engaging, the characters get more development, the stakes are really high, the combat is refined to its absolute peak at this point, the bonding system is fun, the soundtrack is incredible, exploration is not tedious at all, it brings back older characters, sets up ColdSteel, and has moments that shock you. It is an insane ride. Now, of course, the game certainly has its issues, notably in the completion department, but replaying it has legitimately been one of the best gaming experiences of my entire life, and I cannot recommend it enough. I realize I'm not making some crazy controversial stance here. TrailsToAzure is one of the most beloved games in the series, with its own fans having a cult status akin to Mother 3 or Final Fantasy 6. Still, it is genuinely how I feel, and if I had to give my reason why I prefer this to Second Chapter, it comes down to the scale of the story and the combat. Second Chapter is a game with a lot of heart, and it's the reason I became a fan, but this game's epic stakes and swerves make it a really fun ride that cemented Trails as my favorite RPG series of all time. And while I did enjoy the gameplay of Second Chapter, I think I've made it clear that the gameplay was on a gradual increase in quality ever since Second Chapter, with Azure's gameplay on a whole nother level. The ending of this game was also something I really did not expect, and it got me very excited to get into the ColdSteel games after this, but that is a story for another land. I think I have made it more than abundantly clear that I love the Crossbell arc. TrailsFromZero manages to find a perfect balance between being plot-driven and world-driven while improving the gameplay from Sky, and for good measure paying off a subplot from Sky in a way that was honestly perfect. TrailsToAzure kicks things up to 11, while the gameplay creates the perfect middle ground of classic and modern Trails combat. Azure also pays off the plot threads from Zero while giving characters from Sky some great moments too, and features a plot that has had long-lasting effects on the larger narrative all the way up through ColdSteel 4. But more than that, these games were a risk. They could have very easily just made Trails in the Sky 4 and had us follow Estelle and Joshua going on adventures in new lands, but this game changed the dynamic and let us follow a new cast of characters in a new setting and with a new tone and style. Trying to write a new plot that would continue the overall story while doing its own thing cannot be easy, and I really do think they stuck the landing. Heck, setting up the later arcs on top of all of that is also just such a power move, and I can definitely tell you playing ColdSteel without playing Azure would be a very different experience, as pretty much anyone who has done that will tell you that. The wildest thing though is that these games got officially released at all. As I mentioned way back at the start of this retrospective, there are many games that still, to this day, don't have translations, and some that do require you to go through a lot of hoops. Trails is a series with massive scripts, and even translating an older one would be an undertaking. You just cannot compare Trails to most other RPGs, which is part of why we're so behind the newer games in Japan. In many ways, I feel very blessed that I started the series as late as I did, because I got to play from first chapter through ColdSteel 4 in Japanese release order, and none of that would have been possible without the Geofront team and all the fans who pushed this arc all the way to the finish line. So once again, thank you Geofront, and thank you NIS for your work, though I do wish NIS was more transparent about the PS4 ports. That does not invalidate the work that was put in. Thank you guys so much. Now, despite all of my gushing, because I have been speaking from the heart this entire time, I do know this arc and this game in particular do have their detractors, and I honestly don't even expect this video to even change anyone's minds, because honestly, everyone plays these games for different reasons and kind of values different things about them. Really, I think it comes down to what you value the most out of Trails. As I said, Azure is my favorite RPG of all time, and if you have not played it yet, then it would mean the world to me if you played the Crossbell arc. Just also play the Sky games first, because there are some things that both of these games do that would really lose their punch if you don't have the context, but I think you get the idea by this point. I want to give a huge thank you to Snive, Notley, Kingdom Ace, Stupid Studios N, and Fielder Seth, and all of my KoFi supporters on screen for helping support this video in one way or another. This retrospective was easily the hardest thing I have ever had to make, so that support really means a lot. That said, now that the Crossbell arc is finished, it's time to move on to the next arc in the series. That's right everyone, next time class is in session because we are going to be talking about the TrailsofColdSteel games, the most popular arc in the series but also the most divisive. What do I think of the games? Well, you'll have to watch and find out. That said, I am probably going to be taking a break from reviewing the games for a little bit to work on other projects. If you would like to support me, there's my KoFi down below and it would really mean a lot. I won't announce what I'll be making next as it's not totally set in stone yet, but I'll be back to ColdSteel before too long. Regardless, I think it's finally time I put this thing up. Thank you guys so much for watching this Crossbell retrospective. It has sincerely meant a whole lot, and I hope to see you guys in class when we talk about Trails of Cold Steel. Have a great day, everyone.